What's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. I'm the House Hacking Mom, and today I'm going to share with you some of my best tips for saving money on your grocery budget with the rising prices of some of the food at the grocery store. I know it's really important to a lot of us right now to make sure we are staying on our budget and not just completely giving up and saying that, well, food prices have gone up, so we all just have to spend, 20, 30% more on our grocery budget. That is not the way we want to go. We want to stay within our budgets that we already have previously set as best as we can, and I'm going to help you all do that today. So let's get into the tips. So my first tip is to try to start limiting the amount of prepackaged food that you are bringing into the home. This is great. First off, for a health benefit, most foods that are prepackaged, even if they're labeled as healthy type foods or clean type foods, generally speaking, you are going to, one, pay a lot more per calorie of the amount of food that you're getting. The value of that food is very expensive for the amount of food that you're actually getting, and it is just less healthy almost always than something that you could make yourself. This is a super simple example, right? Graham crackers. We all keep these in our home. I obviously do as well. They're a really great little snack for little kids. They love them, and you can use them in baking and desserts and pie crusts, all that sort of thing. We're gonna keep these in our house, right? But when it comes to snacking for you or your kids, it is so much cheaper and healthier to reach for this. And both of these are already completely ready to eat as is. It's challenging if you say stop buying prepackaged food and you have to, make everything you're going to eat ahead of time. Well, foods like bananas or other fruits, obviously. Cheese is another great example. I have some cheese sticks here. Actually, I did a quick comparison. Most bananas are between 80 and 100 calories per banana. Obviously there's really big bananas, smaller bananas, but roughly speaking, between 80 and 100 calories per banana. This string cheese is mozzarella, and it's about 80 calories per stick. And then this brand of graham crackers is also about 80 calories per cookie or cracker, as it's called. But this one is going to be a lot cheaper, especially if you're buying name brand graham crackers. And that's going to be between, probably about $4 a package, whereas the same amount of calories of bananas is going to be a lot cheaper. So just being conscious of that. And when you're giving your kids snacks, kids love snacks. My kids are in heavy snack phase. They're always wanting snacks, and snack food generally is a lot more expensive than mealtime food. So it's also helpful if you can cut off snack time, an hour before eating and all that sort of stuff to make sure your kids are filling themselves up with good, nutritious calories that comes more from meals than snacks. But when you are giving them snacks, it's helpful if you're giving them these kinds of snacks instead of, crackers, chips, all that sort of stuff that's easy. This is just as easy, but it does tend to be less expensive and a lot more filling. You eat a whole banana, you're usually pretty full. You eat a graham cracker, you could probably eat 2 or 3 more before you're really full. While we're on that same note, I just brought out these two, they're not really both cereals. This one is homemade granola, and this one is, some sort of off-brand Cheerios. So the granola is significantly more expensive to make from scratch. I mean, probably all the ingredients to make this one box of granola probably cost, I'm gonna be generous and say $10. It might not have been that much, but let's say it was about $10. So between the oats and the maple syrup and the honey and the coconut and all that sort of stuff. However, this will satisfy your hunger so much more. We don't ever use Cheerios for a meal, like breakfast or something like that. We pretty much exclusively use it for like church snack time, because it's really hard to beat Cheerios when it comes to a mostly mess-free snack. But granola is so much more calorie dense. It's going to satisfy you. It will satisfy your kids. It will go so much further, even though it costs more upfront to make it. This is actually so much more food. I mean, just weight wise, this weighs a lot more. This is so much more substantial, and your dollars are actually going a lot further when it comes to making something like homemade granola, especially compared to store-bought granola. Store-bought granola is super expensive. And I have a recipe for my homemade granola here on my YouTube channel. But you will just see that this sort of thing will go so much further in your house than something like Cheerios will. Another thing you can do to make sure that you are saving as much money as you can when it comes to your grocery shopping is to look and see the things that you just eat a lot of and trying to see if you can find a cheaper way to get that item. For example, I have 2 toddlers. We go through a lot of yogurt, especially in the summer. I found that I was going through 2 quarts a week, easy, especially if we were having smoothies. I mean, we were going through so much yogurt. And yogurt, especially if you're buying Greek yogurt, is kind of expensive. Even if you get the cheaper ones, it's usually around $4 a quart. And that was getting kind of expensive. So I kind of looked it up on the internet and figured out you can make your own homemade yogurt. And it's really nice because when you're making homemade yogurt, it's just cultured milk. There's not going to be any additives to it, no sweeteners, no sugars, nothing else in it. It's just plain cultured yogurt, which is obviously really good for your gut health, all that sort of stuff. But this is just an example of how you can pay attention to the things that you buy a lot of at the grocery store and trying to just see if you can figure out a way to either buy it or make it yourself cheaper. So, I buy probably an extra gallon of milk a week compared to what we used to buy. And then I will turn that extra gallon of milk into yogurt. And then sometimes I will strain it to make it a thicker yogurt. And sometimes we'll just eat it plain and it will just be a little bit more of a runny yogurt. Another thing that we go through a lot of is cheese. I love adding cheese. I feel like we eat more cheese in the winter, I will say, because we add it to lots of soups and things like that, lots of grilled cheese sandwiches. So cheese is a great way you can save money, and cheese is a little bit expensive. So at Walmart, I can get this 2-pound white cheddar block. I like getting the white cheddar because it means they haven't added any food coloring to it. So that's kind of nice. But this is, I think, $6 for 2 pounds. So it's a decent price compared to buying it individually, and especially compared to buying it shredded. You're going to get a much better deal buying it in really large blocks. Another thing you want to make sure you are paying attention to when you are trying to be money conscious and saving money on your grocery budget is paying attention to the perishable food that you buy at the store. For example, I have these mushrooms that I bought here, and I plan on putting these in a quiche this week. But you have got to be sure that you are using up your perishable items first in your fridge before they go bad, because things like mushrooms, greens, most of the time when I buy kale, for example, at the grocery store, when I get it home, I pretty much immediately separate it out into portion-sized bags and put it in the freezer, because kale freeze is awesome, and it means that it's not going to get slimy and gross in my refrigerator, which would happen because a lot of times I save soups and things that I use kale for the end of the week. So and that just makes sure that that food is not going to waste. Because the worst thing you can do when you're trying to save money is just absolutely throwing it away by completely wasting food because you let an ingredient go bad. So if you do tend to struggle with this, just make sure you're paying attention and don't let those food items go bad. And if you do it regularly, then that obviously means that you and your family don't actually enjoy that item. If you buy asparagus and you end up letting it go bad most of the time, or it gets slimy most of the time before you use it, you should A, try to make sure you're putting your asparagus in the first part of your week, of your meal plan, and that way you'll make sure it gets eaten. Or B, stop buying asparagus. Buy a different vegetable that you will actually use, or something like broccoli that has a longer shelf life in your refrigerator that you don't have to worry about it spoiling in your fridge. Another thing you can do to try to help make sure that food's not spoiling, for example, I buy the 1-pound package of whole milk mozzarella because this is the only way that you can get the whole milk mozzarella at my Walmart. Well, I don't need this much mozzarella at a time. Usually I'm using it on top of pizza, and you definitely don't need that much. So what I will do is when I'm ready to use it for my pizza, I will keep it sealed until I'm ready to use it. It will last in your fridge for a long time like this. But once this package is opened, it will go bad fairly quickly because mozzarella is a very soft cheese. So what I will do is slice it in half, grate up the amount I need for my pizza for that particular night, and use it. And then with the other half, I will go ahead and grate it and then actually put it in the freezer, because cheese that is grated actually freezes really great. You can put any shredded cheese you have in the freezer if you're concerned you're not going to use it in time. If you put it in as a block, it will be challenging to shred it later on. Thawed cheese usually has a slightly different texture and is kind of challenging to work with, but if it's already shredded, just think of it like a frozen pizza. When you buy a frozen pizza, it's frozen shredded cheese, so it works just the same way. So that's a good way to make sure that something like mozzarella is not going to spoil in your refrigerator and get that nice pink slime on it. Not that that's ever happened to me. Some other things you can do when you're trying to save money on your groceries is to try to think about cheaper, healthier swaps. A lot of us keep canned beans in the pantry because it's a super quick way to make a meal, and they got protein and they're super awesome. But a much cheaper option is actually to buy dried beans. And I know you think dried beans are annoying because you have to soak them and they take a lot longer to cook and all that sort of stuff. That is sort of true. But if you're making something like a chili with canned beans, then chili all of a sudden becomes a not super cheap meal because every can of beans costs at least $1, if not $1.50. And after you put your 6 cans of beans in plus your ground beef, it's not a super cheap meal. Now it's less expensive than, going through a drive-through maybe, but it's not a really cheap meal by the end of it all. If you use something like dried beans, I think these cost like, I don't know, maybe $1, $2 for a whole pound of beans. And when you're paying for dried beans, you're paying for the dried weight. When you're buying canned beans, you buy a 15-ounce can of beans. Well, once these beans are hydrated, they're going to weigh multiple pounds. When you're making a soup with dried beans, you usually only need, half a pound of beans. So like all the beans in the entire recipe only cost like 50 cents compared to, maybe let's say $4 for the beans that are going into soup when you're using canned beans. So it's just something to consider. Plus, dried beans are going to have way less sodium in them compared to canned beans. Canned food always has lots of sodium. And also just in general, a side note, canned food is not a cheap way to buy food. I think it feels like a cheap way to buy food because it's how a lot of our grandparents stored food. We all remember these pantries just full of canned goods. Canned goods are not cheaper and they're actually full of a lot of water. When you buy, a 15-ounce can of green beans, you're probably only getting about 5 ounces of green beans and 10 ounces of water. You're paying for water. As opposed to buying frozen or fresh green beans. It's actually a lot cheaper for the amount of food that you're really getting. Canned food is a lot of water, a lot of sodium. It doesn't usually taste better. It's not generally a cheaper way to buy food. The only canned food that I consistently buy is tomato products because, I make my own marinara sauce and, it goes in a lot of soups, Indian food, lots of sort of things. If you could obviously get really great fresh tomatoes year round, you don't need to buy canned tomatoes, but most of us are going to need to. Another, I don't want to say swap because I would never tell you to swap good olive oil for probably almost anything else because olive oil is so good. But good olive oil is sort of expensive. We all know this. This is one of the cheaper good olive oil brands, the California Olive Ranch. This is a lot less expensive than a lot of other decent quality olive oils. However, we all know that butter is actually a lot less expensive. And no, you don't want to substitute butter for everything with olive oil. But if you are using it in an application where it's not ultra necessary to use olive oil specifically, almost always you can substitute butter or a different sort of fat. Now this, I know it says duck fat. There's no duck fat in here anymore. This is actually bacon fat. And I know you're thinking, how on earth can you substitute bacon fat and butter for good olive oil? But there are a lot of ways that I use both of these instead of olive oil that are very practical and taste delicious. And saturated fat, they are finding in the medical community, is not nearly as bad for you as they used to think it is, as long as it's used, responsibly. So, for frying your egg, or I use bacon fat a lot for roasting vegetables or for making super killer grilled cheese sandwiches. Just a teaspoon of bacon fat will make the most amazing grilled cheese sandwich. And I don't want to say I don't pay for the bacon fat. Obviously, I pay for the bacon, but I always harvest the bacon grease and pour it into here. And then, it's turned solid. It's just like a butter sort of consistency. And it's really super easy to use. And that way, when I'm buying my bacon, I know I'm not letting anything go to waste. I am using every bit of that product because it is an expensive product. And like we talked about earlier, you don't want to let anything go to waste. Another item I want to talk about swapping, hopefully you guys don't think I've harped on this too much, but make your own chicken broth, please. It tastes so much better, and it is less expensive. When you're looking at a recipe for making really delicious bone broth, you're just gonna need a couple onions, some garlic, some carrots, celery if you have it, some parsley if you have it, water, and then just bones. Every time you eat bone-in chicken, Just save the bones, put them in a bag in the freezer, and then once you filled up a gallon freezer bag, you should be able to make at least 12 cups of bone broth. And some people will strain off that broth and make another batch of broth with those same bones. Decent broth from the store probably costs $3 a quart, probably $4 a quart now, whereas you can make your own probably 12 to 16 cups of homemade bone broth for the same price of one. So it's so much cheaper, and a lot of people will tell you to freeze it. You totally can, especially in the summer when you're probably not using it as often. But if you are going through it fairly quickly, like we are in the winter, the bone broth will gelatinize and form a fat crust on the top. So this is technically airtight storage. So if you have the space in your fridge and you don't like having to defrost your chicken broth every time you want to use it, just keep it in the fridge. And I would say as long as you're using it within 2 weeks, it should be totally fine, especially if you don't strain off the fat and you keep it on top. You can always scoop it off before you cook with it, but if you leave it on there for now, then this broth is totally protected from the air and it shouldn't go bad for quite a while. Now, another item you can consider switching out, I know a lot of people will be like, this is a no-go, I can't do this, but try switching out your morning coffee a couple mornings a week with some hot tea. Now, me and my family are biased. We love hot tea. We've kind of been raised on hot tea, but I also drink hot coffee. And tea, even though it is more expensive per pound, if you're buying good quality loose leaf tea, it's more expensive per pound, but you can get significantly more cups of tea out of that same weight of tea compared to coffee. I drink tea regularly, and I probably only go through maybe a pound in a whole calendar year. Whereas compared to, coffee, you can go through a pound of coffee in a month. So tea is a lot cheaper per cup because you only need a teaspoon of tea leaves in order to make a cup of coffee compared to, 2 tablespoons of coffee grounds to make 1 cup of coffee. So your tea will go a lot further and is a lot cheaper if you can learn to enjoy it. And tea is an amazing beverage. I really encourage people to try it because so many of us are just hooked on coffee, which has twice the amount of caffeine compared to black tea. So black tea does have some caffeine in it. It will give you a nice little caffeine boost, but it's not quite as intense for your body as coffee. Another thing I want to talk about is learning to cook with large cuts of meat. Now, I meant to make this video yesterday before I had cooked this really huge pork loin roast that we actually made for company. But generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, large cuts of meat are much cheaper than smaller cuts of meat. If you compare the price of a chicken breast per pound, it's significantly more compared to buying a whole chicken per pound of the same type of chicken. You can't compare, a free-range organic chicken to, conventional chicken breast per pound. But if you're comparing apples to apples, the larger cuts of meat are almost always cheaper than the smaller cuts of meat. So if you're someone who pretty much only cooks with chicken breasts or chicken tenderloins, you don't really know what to do with a whole chicken, I encourage you to learn how to cook bigger cuts of meat. A whole chicken is a really great place to start. They are super, super easy. It's as simple as putting some salt and pepper on the bird and putting it in the oven for an hour and 15 minutes. And it's cooked, and it's just like a rotisserie chicken. It's super, super simple. I have a recipe on my channel here actually of how to make a whole chicken, but I do encourage everyone to learn how to cook whole chickens and larger cuts of meat, something like a pork loin, which is only about $2 per pound, compared to cooking a pork tenderloin, which is probably going to be more like $3 per pound. And this goes all the way into beef also. If you're going to buy a bottom round roast, for example, it's going to be more like $4 a pound compared to something like a steak, which is going to be more like $9 a pound. So if you learn to cook the cheaper cuts of meat, just watch videos here on YouTube. It's not that difficult. Usually cooking bigger cuts of meat takes more time and preparation and salting things in the morning or the night before. But ultimately, you're going to get to enjoy that cut of meat, and it's going to be so much cheaper than buying the smaller, easier to cook counterpart. And also, as a side note, really one of the biggest things when it comes to saving money on your grocery budget is just learning to cook food that costs less. Learning to make really good rice, learning to make really good beans, learning how to cook a whole chicken, and just becoming a better cook in general is going to make it a lot easier for you to save money on your grocery budget. My last 3 tips are ones that you have probably already heard me say. The first one is not to buy pre-made drinks. But you don't need to be buying juice. You don't need to be buying soft drinks and bringing all that sort of garbage into your house, and it will save you so much money. Next tip, also something I've harped on a lot, make sure that you are actually menu planning or meal planning. It's really easy to just go to the store and just buy things that you feel like you're low on, but when you get home, you end up wasting a lot of food, or stuff gets shoved into the back and doesn't get used. And then you end up wasting so much money because you're not actually cooking and using the foods that you bought. So it's really important to meal plan so you know that you're going to actually use up the things that you bought, especially perishable items, before they go bad. And then also in that, make sure you're not forgetting breakfast and lunches. And that way you're not always turning to cereal to save the day for breakfast, because cereal is expensive. And then my last tip for you guys is to try to make sure that you are only shopping once a week, or preferably, if you can stretch it further, maybe once every 10 days or twice a month. Because when you only shop once a week, no matter what, you will save so much money, because it is way harder to keep track of a budget if you're spending it in $20, $30 increments than if you're spending it 1 week at a time. And y'all know that I separate my budget weekly, so we spend $100 a week on groceries, and it helps me so much. And of course, occasionally you're gonna have to make runs to the grocery store, but if in general you only shop once a week and you try to just make it through, as soon as you run out of something, don't be like, must go to the grocery store right now. You might think, we're out of fresh vegetables. But are you really? Check your freezer. You probably have a bag of frozen peas that's been in there for, a month and hasn't been touched. You might think, I'm out of fresh fruit. I have to go to the grocery store. But are you really? Check your freezer. You probably have some frozen fruit in there that you haven't used. Or maybe you have some apples that look kind of meh at the bottom of your fridge drawer that maybe need to be worked through. And one last little bonus tip is to try to pick a store and actually learn it. Learn your grocery store. Now, Aldi is my grocery store. I also shop at Walmart and supplement for things like diapers that I really need to get. But in general, Aldi is my grocery store. And if Aldi doesn't carry something, with the exception of something like flour, I buy unbleached all-purpose flour from Walmart. But otherwise, if Aldi doesn't carry something, we don't eat it. And I have learned to cook with the food and the produce that is in Aldi instead of, going to a bunch of different stores and kind of cherry picking my favorite things. I find that I'm able to stay on budget so much easier if I just, for the most part, just have one store and learn it. Learn the days that they have sales. For example, most stores have their sales, their best sales of the week, on Wednesdays. So that can obviously be really helpful when it comes to saving money on your grocery budget. So those are all, or at least most of my tips when it comes to saving money on your grocery budget. I really hope this was helpful. Please make sure you guys put in the comments below if you have any extra tips that would help all of us save a little bit more money on our grocery budget. Please make sure you go down below and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I make new videos like this every week about frugal living, healthy eating, and minimalist parenting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye guys.